BBC One, the latest news headlines with Martin Lewis.
President Gorbachev has decided to send a personal envoy on a peace mission to Baghdad. The Soviet leader said Moscow remained committed to UN resolutions on liberating Kuwait, but he added that he was concerned Allied military action might exceed the UN mandate. The situation, he said, is becoming ever more alarming. Whole countries face catastrophic destruction. From Moscow, Martin Sixsmith reports.
The president's statement, read on Soviet television, was a shot across the bows of the American-led coalition and confirmation that Moscow's support for the military campaign against Iraq is beginning to waver. The Soviet Union's own Muslim population is becoming increasingly vocal in its support for Baghdad. These Azerbaijani demonstrators, many of whom say they'll go to fight in Saddam's army, are threatening unrest and putting Moscow under increasing internal pressure. Soviet Deputy Foreign Minister Belonogov, now touring the Middle East, has accused the Allies of bombing Iraqi civilian targets, reflecting Moscow's fear that Washington intends to destroy Iraq, leaving a permanent US military presence in the region. And Yevgeny Primakov, the Kremlin's troubleshooter who maintained contacts with Saddam until the eve of war, is now likely to go back to Baghdad, with a view to securing Soviet influence in the Middle East once the fighting is over.
Kuwait is giving £660 million to Britain to help pay for the cost of the war. The extra money was offered after a meeting in Saudi Arabia between the Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, and the exiled Emir of Kuwait. Meanwhile, the US Defense Secretary Dick Cheney and his most senior military commander, General Colin Powell, have held a series of meetings with Allied generals in Saudi Arabia.
After 24 days of Allied air attacks, a meeting with King Fahd of Saudi Arabia is the latest stage of the decision-making process to decide the timing of the ground offensive. Earlier, at a briefing at the command headquarters in Riyadh, they'd been told of the effectiveness of the bombardment so far. It's not thought that a firm timetable for the final phase of the Gulf conflict will be settled this weekend. Also in Saudi Arabia, the Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, was told that the Kuwaiti government in exile had to give the British war effort £660 million. In talks, Mr Hurd discussed the future of Iraq after the war.
Of course it will remain as a separate country, and we have no idea of altering or allowing anybody to alter the frontiers of Iraq.
Meanwhile, Iraqi Deputy Prime Minister Sadoun Hamadi has been in Tehran in response to a recent Iranian peace initiative. He delivered a personal letter from Saddam Hussein. The Iraqis say they'll hold a press conference on its contents in the next 12 hours.
Other developments on the 24th day of the war. 5 American B-52s have taken off from RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire, apparently on a Gulf bombing mission. It's their first from Britain. Baghdad Radio says President Bush and Mr Major are war criminals who will be tossed on the scrap heap of history. The Allied military say that at least 750 of Iraq's 4,000 tanks have been destroyed, and Saudi artillery fought off an Iraqi incursion attempt. The rest of the news: over 90% of those who took part in today's referendum in Lithuania voted in favour of the Republic's independence from Moscow, according to a local parliamentary spokeswoman. President Gorbachev had declared the poll illegal, but no action was taken to stop people voting. Here, the Prime Minister, John Major, has promised a never-ending search to improve public services. And in a wide-ranging speech at the Young Conservatives Conference in Scarborough, he again made it plain what the government's top policy priority would be.
At the top of my personal agenda for the 1990s is education. Education is the key to opening new paths for all sorts of people, not just the most gifted, and for doing so at every stage of their lives.
Weather forecasters say the wintry weather will continue until at least next weekend. Heavy snow is still disrupting road, rail and air travel, and most sports fixtures were cancelled. The worst hit areas are in the east of Britain. Shelter, the housing charity, says it's giving emergency aid to voluntary groups to help the homeless during the cold weather. That's all for now. I'll be back with more news at 20 to 2 here on BBC One.
A As strains emerge in the Labour Party over its stance on the Gulf War, Jonathan Dimbleby tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock puts Shadow Foreign Secretary Gerald Kaufman on the record to explain the opposition's policy.
There's been an ID on the victim. It's Deborah Lee Curtis, Amanda. She's dead.
This is Detective Ryder. She's from Laramie, Wyoming, investigating a homicide.
I'm telling you, I don't know anymore.
While I do grieve for Deborah Lee, she was merely passing through on her way to oblivion.
I don't believe this.
We were sneaking in a load of gold. Because gold is just like booze or gambling. You always want more.
We found it, Samson! We found the gold!
Beverly Hills Connection, Tuesday at 10:55 and Wet Gold, Wednesday at 11:35 on One.
Now on One, we've comedy and adventure in turn-of-the-century Texas, as John Wayne heads to cast in our late-night film,